In this video we are going to study the Sicilian Dragon, which is one of the best defenses against the king's pawn. After the move e4, Black can respond with c5, entering the Sicilian defense. Black advances with a side pawn and takes control of the d4 square. So, if White plays d4 to occupy the center with his pawns, then Black will be able to capture on d4. White can play knight f3, developing his king's knight and taking control of the d4 square. His plan is to advance with d4 to occupy the center with his pawns and, if Black captures on d4, then be able to recapture with the knight. Black can play d6, taking control of the e5 square. The idea is to continue with knight f6, to attack the e4 pawn without allowing it to advance. White can play d4, occupying the center with his pawns. Black responds c takes d4, eliminating the opponent's central pawn and exchanging it for his side pawn. So Black is left with a central majority of pawns. After knight takes d4, Black can play knight f6, developing the king's knight and threatening to capture the e4 pawn. White can play knight c3, developing the queen's knight and defending the e4 pawn. Now, Black can play g6, entering the Dragon Sicilian, which is a very flexible and natural variation, in which Black develops his pieces towards very active squares. In particular, the king's bishop will be developed on the g7 square, where it will be very well placed, as it will exert pressure on the center and the queen side. The name dragon comes from the shape of the black pawns, which resemble the back of a dragon. Furthermore, the bishop from g7 expels fire along the large diagonal of dark squares. In the dragon variation, Black develops very easily, without creating structural weaknesses. They will develop their queen's knight on its natural square, they will castle on the king side, and the queen's bishop can develop on the d7 or e6 square. Black keeps two pawns in the center and has a very good game. If White wants to fight for the advantage, he has to adopt aggressive measures, which is why he usually castles on the queen side and tries to launch the pawns into the attack on the king side. Now, the best move for White is bishop e3. The plan is to continue with queen d2, and then castle on the queen side. Now, it would be a mistake to play knight g4, to attack the enemy bishop, because White plays bishop b5 check and wins. Since in case of bishop d7, White plays queen takes g4, winning a piece. The black bishop is pinned and cannot capture the white queen. And if after the move bishop b5 checks, Black defends himself with knight c6. White plays knight takes c6 and wins, since after b takes c6, bishop takes c6 check, White is winning. After the move bishop to e3, Black's best option is bishop g7, developing the king's bishop through the fianchetto and preparing to castle. Now, Black is indeed threatening knight g4, to attack the bishop on e3, since in the event of a check on b5 the black king will be able to escape to the f8 square. Now, the best move for White is f3, taking control over the g4 square, to prevent the black pieces from making use of that square, and at the same time reinforcing the defense of the e4 pawn. Now Black can castle. White can play queen d2, mobilizing the queen and preparing to castle on the long side. Furthermore, with this move White prepares to be able to invade the h6 square with his bishop in the future. Now, Black can play knight c6, developing the queen's knight on its natural square and pressing against the white knight on d4. So now it is not possible to bishop h6, with the idea of eliminating the black bishop from the fianchetto, because Black responds with bishop takes h6 and gains material. Since in case of knight takes c6, Black plays bishop takes d2 check and wins. And in the case of queen takes h6, Black responds with knight takes d4 and is left with an advantage. After the knight move c6, black is threatening to advance with d5 to react in the center and free his position. Now white basically has three ways to continue. They can play g4, with the idea that if black plays d5, then white can respond with g5, to divert the knight from f6 and then capture the d5 pawn. Another option after knight c6 is to castle on the queenside. White does not prevent the d5 move and wants to continue its development. Black can respond in several ways. He can advance with d5, or it is also good to capture on d4, and after bishop takes d4 he can play bishop e6, completing the development of his better pieces and placing the bishop on a good diagonal, aiming against the enemy castling. Another option after knight c6 is bishop c4, which is considered the main variation. White completes the development of his minor pieces and increases control over the d5 square, to avoid black's d5 move. Now black can play in several ways. In the following videos we will study very illustrative master games in which we will see the typical plans for both sides.